and to maintain our motivation, really wanting to work for the benefit of sentient beings, and knowing that to do that in the best way, we have to really work on ourselves first, as well as help sentient beings while we're practicing. But we're going to learn about emptiness now, because if we have compassion but not any wisdom of emptiness, then many obstacles to being of benefit. So to liberate ourselves in order, but not just ourselves, so to gain the wisdom, the liberating wisdom, so we can share it with others and gain the power and abilities to communicate best with others, then we'll listen to the teachings this evening. Okay. So one thing before we start, next week is I will be in California. So I made you a quiz. Okay? So I think Venerable Damcha, you can put the quiz up so that the people can get the questions or print it out, and then work on studying it this week, and then next Thursday, go through and discuss the answers. So you can choose one of you to kind of lead the session, and then, discuss the answers. And it'll be a very good review for you. So we'll start with chapter 9. Okay? Okay. So, if you were thinking about the last chapter that we finished last week, why people can't listen or, don't kind of follow the Buddha's teachings about emptiness. One point that comes out very clear is that, what is the major obstacle? It's our grasping at true existence. Yeah, so why can't we understand emptiness? Because we're too involved in grasping at true existence. Yeah, so the thing we want to destroy is the actual obstacle to us learning about how to destroy it. Okay, and why that is that, we're just, because of beginningless time and familiarity with grasping at true existence, it is just much more comfortable for us to think that there's a real person. And so there's a real person that is alive now. There's a real person that dies, a real person that goes to the bardo, a real person that gets reborn, And so we, the idea of there being a soul or an Atma is, we sign up for that. Yeah. Whereas we really need to think and question, is it possible for such a thing to exist? Yeah, if there were a permanent self, could a permanent self take rebirth? Yeah, permanent means it doesn't change moment to moment, so how could something not change moment to moment and still change enough to be reborn in a new body and to have their mental aggregates change very dramatically too? Okay, so really think about that, yeah? And, then the question always comes up, well, if there's not some truly existent self, then what is it that is reborn? Yeah, how can a not truly existent self get reborn? Well, if we think deeply, it's only because the self does not truly exist, does not inherently exist, that it can be reborn. Because if it did have its own mode of being independent of everything else, it would be permanent, it couldn't get reborn. So it's because, the self is a dependent arising phenomena, dependent on causes and conditions, dependent on parts, dependent on name and label, yeah, that because it's dependent, then it's possible for it to change, and that is what gets reborn. But we can't find that self when we look for it. So don't get the idea that, okay, there is one inherently existent self here, and then there's a not inherently existent self here, and we're saying that one doesn't exist, but this one does, but this one just happens to look exactly like that one. No, when you think about something that does not inherently exist, it means when you try and find what it is, you can't find anything. Okay, but when you don't search for what it is, there is an appearance of something, and that appearance functions. Okay? And it's the same with karma, or karmic seeds. None of those things are inherently existent. Yeah? It's not like you create karma and then there's, okay, there's a blue seed and a red seed and a purple seed on your mind stream, and, and they all kind of pick up and transfer to the next life. No, these are propensities. They aren't even form. Yeah, so they don't have to travel in any kind of physical distance. Yeah. But they exist and they perform a function. But where are you going to find a karmic seed? Okay, and then when you talk about karma, the action that planted the karmic seed, exactly what is the action? Because any action has multiple components. And, which one of the components is going to be the action? Again, you can't point to any one of them. But just when you don't try and find it, we talk about actions, and actions have results. Okay? So it's not the karmic seed that's reborn. It's not the karma that's reborn. Yeah? It's the mere I that you can't find that is reborn. And that mere I exists, it's designated independence upon principally the consciousness, especially at the time of death, because the body completely falls apart. So, principally upon the consciousness aggregate. But again, you can't find the self in the consciousness aggregate, because the self is not one moment of consciousness. It's something that is merely labeled independence upon many moments of consciousness, and those moments of consciousness cannot exist, independent of all the mental factors that accompany them. So, wherever you look, you see dependent arising there. Yeah, so only something that exists dependently can be reborn. Something that has its own nature from its own side, can never be reborn. It can never function, for that matter. Okay? So we have to kind of keep coming back to this. And it feels weird, because when we look at a person, we feel like, gee, there's a real person there. I can see them. But then, what is that real person? Or we feel there's a real car there, or there's real money there, or there's whatever it is, But what exactly are you going to point to as being that thing? That you can isolate and identify as being only that. Yeah, you can. Okay, so when we started, last week we started chapter 13, which is refuting truly existent sense organs and objects. Yeah, one of the reasons that we were using is when you look at here it uses a pot, but when you look at a cup, yeah, it looks to us like this whole thing is a cup, and that it has the essence of being a cup right there. It's like, if that isn't a cup, well, certainly this isn't a cup, and that's not a cup. So this has a cup. The essence of cupness completely permeates this whole thing. That's what it looks like, isn't it? You know, no matter where you look, which way you look at it, it's a cup. Yeah, cup permeates this whole thing. Yeah, well, in that case, yeah, when, you know, every time you see the cup, you should be seeing all of the parts, because the cup permeates all of the parts of the cup. But when you look, you don't see all of the cup, do you? You only see part of the cup. Yeah. So is this part the cup? Because you look at it and say, I see the cup. So is only the part here that you see the cup? Because then that would mean that this side was not the cup. But if you said that the whole thing was the cup, then when you saw the cup, you should see all the parts, all at one time.
Why?
Because you're seeing the cup, and the cup permeates all the parts. Okay, we look at it, right? The whole thing is a cup. It's radiating cup energy. So if you say, I see the cup, then you should see the whole entire thing, because cup permeates every part of it. But you don't. You only see part of the cup when you see the cup, right?
But in our mind, we name that whatever glaze and colors and whatever that shape with the end, all of that, we decided we call it cup. So where do we get cup there?
Yeah, okay, so when we stop and think, we realize, oh yeah, there's all these parts put together, and we conceive of it as an object and call it cup, and we all agree on that name. And that makes complete sense when we stop to think about it. But our automatic, unfiltered perception distorts that, and we don't see it like that. When we look at the cup, we don't look at it as a bunch of parts that we are conceiving and labeling. We look at it as radiating, hi, I'm a cup, from its own side. So the problem is in our mind. First, you know, how the thing is appearing to the mind, how we're perceiving it, and then the fact that we go along with that appearance.
So we need to train ourselves to decortic everything?
To what?
Pull apart.
Yes, we do need to train ourselves. You know, it's a very good daily exercise when you have nothing to do, to sit there and look at whatever is in front of you. And, you know, I see a spoon. Well, what is the spoon? And try and find the thing that is the spoon. Or I see the table. Yeah, very good to do when you're eating lunch. I see spaghetti. What do I, you know, what's the spaghetti? Is it the noodles? Is it the sauce? I say, I'm eating spaghetti, but there's still spaghetti on the plate. But am I eating spaghetti or am I eating noodles? Which one am I eating? Okay, because if something has an essence, it can only have one name. It can only be one thing. It can't have more than one essence. So it has to be either spaghetti or it has to be a noodle. So which one is it? Okay.
By pulling apart things like that, like on and on and on, that will help us to eventually like grab something?
Yeah, that helps by pulling things apart like this. It helps us see that things are a composite of parts that are given a name, that are conceived of and given a name. And that aside from the name given, the object being named does not exist inside the parts.
But what will happen to our consciousness? What is the click that will...
You do it and you see.
Okay.
Okay?
But don't listen for a click. That's not it.
Okay, so, this thing that we were, looking at last time, you should see the whole entire cup when you're looking at it, if it's a cup that exists from its own side and have the nature of cup. And then every piece of it should be cup. And if every piece of the cup is cup, then you have many cups. Either that or you only have one piece, but then you should see the whole piece whenever you see the cup. Okay, but none of that, makes any sense. Okay, so the dialecticians, who we're still not sure exactly who they are, but somebody with incorrect views, they say sense consciousnesses are direct perceivers in relationship to their engaged object. Okay, the 5 sense objects that exist by their own characteristics. Okay, so the engaged object is the observed object, the actual object, that is being known. And so, visual, the visual sense organ, perceives color, and the audio sense organ perceives sound, and so on. And we think that all these organs or sense powers exist, by their own nature, and that their objects that they perceive also exist by their own nature, and that the consciousnesses that perceive the objects by means of the sense organ connecting the object to the consciousness, that these consciousnesses are totally unmistaken. Yeah? Okay, that's how things appear to us. This is the appearance I was saying that we don't even question. Yeah? I mean, this is a mouse, and this is a recorder, and this is a cup top. Yeah? And it looks like that from its own side. And we think that our sense consciousnesses are perceiving these things correctly. Yeah? And that's what the dialecticians assert, that our sense consciousnesses are valid, unmistaken, non-deceptive, cognizers. And, according to the Prasangika, yeah, it's a non-deceptive knower with respect to an object of comprehension that is its main object of engagement. Okay? So it's non-deceptive in that, on a conventional way, it can correctly identify and know its object, but it's not unmistaken because that object appears truly existent to the sense consciousnesses. Okay? Okay, so when we're perceiving green, the green of the tablecloth here, both green and green existing from its own side appear to our visual consciousness that is apprehending green. And the two, they appear very mixed, So there's green there, but we're totally, mistaken in how that green is appearing to us, and then how we think about it afterwards, because it looks like green from its own side. Yeah, but because the green and the green existing from its own side are completely blended together, from the purview of our visual consciousness. Okay, when we take this apart, the visual consciousness, as a whole, we say is mistaken because the green appears truly existent. Okay? But more specifically, it is mistaken with respect to the green that exists from its own side. Okay, because green existing from its own side doesn't exist. So it's wrong in terms of that. But that consciousness in terms of, with respect to just plain old green, that's unqualified with anything, green is its main object of engagement, and it, that visual consciousness sees green. So it's a valid cognizer with respect to green, but a reliable cognizer with respect to green. But it's not a reliable cognizer with respect to green that exists from its own side. Okay? Now the two things are appearing together, and our ordinary consciousness can't differentiate those. But this is how, from the Prasangika system, you can still say that our senses are reliable cognizers, although they are mistaken. So we say that they're reliable because, a reliable cognizer is a cognizer that helps us accomplish our goal of, getting what we want, getting what's desirable and getting away from what's undesirable. So that consciousness that apprehends green can still do that, with respect to the conventional green that exists, even though that consciousness is mistaken because the green is appearing to exist from its own side. Okay. So now we're on verse 302, which says, by means of this very analysis, those with superior intelligence should refute individually all that is fragrant, sweet, and soft. Okay, so by fragrant, it means all objects that, appeared to our olfactory sense. Sweet, all the ones appearing to our gustatory, and then soft, everything appearing, to our tactile senses. Okay, so using that reasoning, that refutes that sense consciousness is a direct perceiver in relationship to a pot or blue or whatever that exists from its own side. Using that same kind of reasoning, the wise with superior intelligence, that's what we want to be, good aspiration, we refute separately the assertions that sense consciousness are direct perceivers in relationships to fragrances, sweet tastes, and that which is soft to its touch, when those things are existing from their own side. Okay? So in terms of, any truly existent functioning thing, remember before we had that whole chapter refuting truly existent functioning things? So if something is a truly existent functional thing, then we can't make distinctions such as seeing one part but not seeing the other. So with the cup, if the cup is truly existent and this thing is really a cup, we can't make a distinction between just seeing this part and not seeing this part like we just went through. We should be able to see the whole thing, and each part should actually be a cup. Okay? So that's one thing. We can't make distinctions in terms of if things are truly existent. Okay? Another thing we can't make distinctions in terms of is in terms of what touches and what does not touch it. Okay? So if this is a truly existent cup, and I say, I touch the cup, okay, I'm touching the cup, then my finger is touching the entire cup. So it should be touching the whole thing. Is my finger touching the whole thing? No. Okay. So you can't make a distinction between what touches and what doesn't touch, because it should touch this whole thing. Yeah? Or if you're thinking about little atoms, you know, that whole refutation that we have about the smallest particles, yeah, that if they're the smallest particles that don't have parts, and they're truly existent, then how can you say that two of them touch each other? Okay, because they're truly existent and they don't have parts. So there could be no difference between them touching and not, and you know, you can't distinguish them touching and them not touching, because if they don't have parts, they can't touch, and they would totally merge into one thing. Okay. Another thing we couldn't distinguish if things were truly existent is we couldn't distinguish the near side of the object and the far side of the object. Okay? Because, that's an example. Yeah, I see the wall over there. Yeah? So I see all, when I say I see the wall, you know, if the wall truly exists, I must be seeing all of the wall at the same time. So that means the whole wall must be the same distance from my eye consciousness if I'm seeing it at the same time. Yeah, we all know that, I mean, we can't actually tell because it's at the speed of light, but we see near things first and distant things afterwards. Okay? If things were, you know, if an object were truly existent, we should see the whole entire object all at one time. Yeah? So we couldn't say, oh, this part is closer and that part is further away. Or another, a better example would be a train. Okay? Forget the wall. Train is a better example. You're stopped at the train stop and you say, I see the train. If the train truly existed, then you should see the first car that you're seeing, and the way end of the car should be the same distance away from you, because you're seeing the train, which is one object, solid through and through. Okay? But that's not what's happening. We're seeing one part that's closer, you know, and the end of the train that is around the corner we aren't even seeing yet. Okay? So we should be able to perceive close and distant parts of an inherently existent object simultaneously. Okay? But the problem is all of those parts, or none of those parts, the meaning is the same, are not the object. None of those train cars are the train. Yeah? None of the little strips of wall are the wall. Okay? The wall is imputed in dependence on the parts. The train is imputed in dependence on all the cars. Okay? So if things were not imputed, when we saw something, we should see all of it all together. Because, why? Because the object would be totally one with the parts. The object and the parts, if this is the cup, then every single part here is the cup. Okay? So But that's not the case. Yeah? If every single thing on the car on the train were the train, yeah, is every single car the train? No, they're parts of the train. Yeah? So what we have to understand is that the whole and the parts are not the same. They exist mutually dependent on each other, but they are not one and the same. Okay? The parts depend, the whole depends on the parts being assembled in a certain way. But not just assembled, we have to come along and look at that assembly of parts and give it the label train or whatever it is. Okay? Yeah, but if nobody labels it train, then it's just a bunch of boxcars or something. Okay? But the boxcars themselves are not the train. Because when you say, here comes the train, it's not because one boxcar is coming along the railroad line. Yeah? There has to be an assembly, and the assembly has to be in a particular arrangement, and we have to come along and conceive of that arrangement of parts as being an object and give it the name. Yeah? So it doesn't it is not that object from its own side, but it appears to us, to our senses, even as if it is an object from its own side, and that nobody needs to come along and give it a name and a label. That all by itself out here, without anybody making it, without any parts needing to come together, there is a cup that kind of appeared out of nowhere. Yeah. Remember when we were building Chenrezig Hall? Yeah. And we were asking ourselves, at what point do we call this Chenrezig Hall? Yeah. And we kept on each week, is it Chenrezig Hall yet? Is it Chenrezig Hall yet? Yeah, and when we got, they put up the front sign that said Chenrezig Hall. Even though it said Chenrezig Hall, we still weren't convinced that it was Chenrezig Hall because it couldn't function like the object we were building. Yeah. So even though it had that label, was it really Chenrezig Hall? And if it was Chenrezig Hall, then Chenrezig Hall would already be built. And there would be no need to build it, because it would already be Chenrezig Hall. So we couldn't say, we're building it. We would say, it is Chenrezig Hall. But we certainly weren't ready to move in just because the sign Chenrezig Hall went up. Yeah, because the walls weren't in and it was a mess. Okay? So, when we ask ourselves and look more closely, it's really quite interesting, At what point does it become Chenrezig Hall? And when we say we're building Chenrezig Hall, what exactly are we building? Because if Chenrezig Hall already existed, we wouldn't need to build it. If Chenrezig Hall were totally non-existent, we could never build it. So we're building the future Chenrezig Hall, which remember is, or we were at that time, which remember is not a form. Yeah, it's an affirmative negative. Okay, that's what we were building. But the future Chenrezig Hall was not already existent as a form, because if it were, we couldn't build it. We wouldn't have to, it would be there. And if Chenrezig Hall were totally non-existent, truly existent, non-existent, then we could never build it. But somehow, magically, we managed to build Chenrezig Hall. Isn't it quite amazing? Like, where was Chenrezig Hall before we built it? Yeah, there was an idea in our mind. But the idea wasn't Chenrezig Hall. Okay? Yeah? So all these kind of nutty things happen when you assert true existence, you know, because you can't, then when you start examining, you can't make sense of stuff. So verse 303, if because the form is seen, everything is seen, why because of what is not seen would the form not be seen? Okay, so if because the form is seen, the cup is seen, everything is seen, so the whole parts are seen, okay, and actually every part, yeah, if we say that that when we see the cup, that we see every part of the cup, then we should also see the smell, and we should see the taste, and we should see the smoothness, we should see the hardness, because those are all parts of the cup. Okay, but that doesn't make any sense. But then, okay, so Joe Blow comes along and says all parts of the cup are seen when its visual form is seen. The visual form is only what appears to our eye, so the colors. Okay, so he's saying all the parts of the cup are seen when the visual form is seen, because the cup is not a separate entity from its visual form. It is its visual form. But then, it says, if because the visual consciousness sees the cup's form, then all parts of the cup are seen. Okay, so why can't we say, so then we should be able to see say that we see the smell and the taste and the smoothness and the hardness, because those are parts of it. If once you say, yeah, because remember Joe Blow said all parts of the cup are seen when you see the visual form. But that's not true. All the parts are not seen when you see the visual form. Okay? But then, because you don't see all parts when you see the cup, because he was saying, because the first two lines were, if because the form is seen, everything is seen. Okay, I see the form, so I see everything. Then, how come when you don't see the smoothness of the cup, that means that you don't see the color either? Yeah? If because when you see it, you see all of the parts, as Joe Blow says, then if you don't see all of, you don't see some of the parts, then why do you see the color? If you're, in other words, Joe Blow, if you're making it an all or nothing proposition, then the fact that we don't see the smoothness of the cup would mean that we shouldn't see the color of the cup either, because they're all equally parts of the cup. And if you see the cup, you see all the parts. If you don't see all the parts, then you wouldn't see the cup. So we shouldn't see the cup if we don't see the smoothness or the hardness. Okay? Okay? So there is no direct perception of just the form alone, because it has a close and a distant, as well as a separate part. Okay? So this verse is refuting the direct perceiver of just the visual form existing by its own characteristics. So Joe Blow says, though the pot is not a directly perceptible object of comprehension, so although we can't, it says pot, I should change it all the cup. So though the cup, now he's changing, isn't a directly perceptible object of comprehension because we only are seeing the color of the cup, right? Yeah. Then its visible form, the color and the shape of the pot, are established by a direct perceiver, and thus indirectly a pot that exists from its own side is also an object of direct perception, is also directly perceptible. Okay? So it's saying because you can see the color and shape, and they're established as truly existent by the eye consciousness, this is what Joe Blow is saying, then you can indirectly say that the pot is. Okay? So Aryadeva says, there is no direct perceiver of just the visible form alone that exists from its own side. Okay? Because the visible form has too many parts, close part, distant part, central part. Okay? So when you say, I perceive the color or the form, the shape of the cup, exactly what are you perceiving? Especially in this cup, it has so many colors. I see the color. Which color are you seeing? I see the shape of the cup. Are you seeing the roundness? Are you seeing the height of the cup or the flatness of the cup? Yeah? Okay, so what exactly are you seeing when you say you're seeing the cup? Because the visual form itself has many different parts. Yeah, so the cup has many parts. The visual form, the smell, the taste, the hardness, and all these things. But each of those things also has parts. The color has many parts. The shape has many parts. The smell has many parts. The tactile sensation has many parts. Okay? So, Joe Blow's argument was, okay, maybe we can't see the cup, a truly existent cup, but we see the truly existent form, so indirectly we can say we see a truly existent cup. But Aryadeva is saying you don't even see a truly existent visible form. Okay? Because the visible form has many parts. All of these different parts, the taste, the touch, and whatever, the parts have parts. So none of this exists from its own side. So then 305, okay, this also applies when one examines whether particles have parts or not. Okay, thus to prove a thesis by that which must be proved is not feasible. Okay, so when it says this applies when one examines whether the particles have parts or not, as you keep dividing something smaller and smaller, okay, when you take the parts of the pot and you separate the parts, the form is reduced to its smallest parts. So then we have to investigate whether those smallest parts have parts or not. Okay, if they have parts, a front side and a back side, then they're not the smallest parts because you can subdivide them between the front and the back. On the other hand, if they don't have any parts, then you couldn't perceive them at all. Because without a front or a back, something doesn't occupy any area, so it would be totally imperceptible. Okay, So if they don't have parts, they cannot exist, because they're inapprehensible. So you can't prove that a pot that exists from its own side as a directly perceivable object of comprehension. You can't say that, by saying that the parts themselves exist from their own side as directly perceptible objects. Okay? Because parts that, no matter what size the part is, you can't say that it exists by its own side and is, that kind of part is apprehended by the visual consciousness. Okay? So the point is that nothing that exists from its own side, is what's apprehending. Because you're actually apprehending all the parts, and then the mind is putting them together to make one object. When Dennis was here, he was talking about how even in our brain, our senses fill in the blanks when we see an object, and that what we think we're seeing directly actually is not what's there, because the brain is, putting objects together, putting parts together to make them into an object, and it's making up for things that are not seen, like where our optic nerve attaches to the retina. There's a blank spot, but we don't see that when we look at something. The brain fills it in, or the mind fills it in. Somehow it gets filled in. Okay, and even though our eyes, are seeing different things, because, do you do this? I remember as a kid, you do this and you see your eyes are perceiving different things, but somehow they all get blended into one image. So even, it seems like even on the level of raw sense data, there is already a lot of stuff, what we're seeing is not a totally direct perceiver. It's being perception. Already it's being altered by the brain. Of course, when Dennis was here, I was saying we just got to accept it the way they see it, and they're not thinking in terms of the brain. But the point, it comes out to the same thing.
Can I ask a question? Because it seems almost like this reasoning is almost removed. If something is inherently existent, it doesn't even have parts. So to try to break it down into parts when you're trying to conceive of it as being inherently existent, it just seems dumb.
Well, that's that means we're getting somewhere. Because if it inherently existed, it is one uniform, solid thing with no parts. Because if it has parts, it depends on other things, and inherent existent means independent.
Right.
Okay? But you can see when you look at a person, there's Venerable Tarpa right there. I don't see parts of her. There's this appearance of one person, and that's it, and I think there's a real person there. Okay. Then 306. Everything too is a component as well as being a composite. Thus, even a spoken syllable does not have inherent existence here. Okay, so this is another line of reasoning. So when objects are apprehended by our physical senses, when we examine them, they are parts in relationship to wholes, but they're also wholes in relationship to their parts. Okay? So when we look at the computer here, it looks like one object. Okay, but the computer has many, many parts. in relationships to its parts, it is the composite. Okay, it's the whole. But in relationship, when I say, I see the room, yeah, when I say I see the room, then the computer is part of what I'm seeing. But the computer is not the room. Okay? So in relationship to one thing, a computer is a part. It's a composite made of parts. In relationship to another thing, it is a part. Okay? Because it's true, when you come in here and you say, I see the room, what in the world do you mean by I see the room? What exactly are you seeing? Yeah? Are you seeing just walls? Are the walls the room? You aren't seeing the windows? When you come in here and you say, I see the room, yeah? This is in the room. Isn't this part of the room? Is the computer part of the room or not? Is the furniture part of the room or not? Your insurance company says it's part of the room if it's nailed down. But if you unscrew the nails, even though it's standing in the same place, it's no longer part of the room, according to the insurance company. That doesn't make much sense, does it? Okay, but they're drawing a line somewhere. But we have to ask, you know.
What if you only unscrew the screws halfway?
Huh?
What if you unscrew
The screw's halfway. Yeah, can you collect your insurance if the room burns down?
As long as it doesn't move.
Or after it burns, you have to go put the screws back in.
Then half of the screw might be burnt.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so when we examine objects, you know, an object it's not inherently a whole, it's not inherently a composite, and it's not inherently a component. Because it depends upon what it is you're speaking of it in relationship to. Okay? Like we say we had carrots for lunch. Okay? In relationship to lunch, carrots is a part. In relationship to the parts of the carrot is a composite, a whole. So is it one thing or is it many things? Is it a part or is it a whole?
And that's totally dependent on.
Huh?
And that's totally dependent on what we're looking at.
And that's completely dependent on how we're labeling it. Yeah? Yeah? If you're interested in all the parts of the carrot, like in biology class, you know, the center of the carrot and the roots of the carrot and the top, you know, then the carrot is something that has parts, and you see it as a composite of its parts. But when you say we had carrots for lunch, then
You put it in the soup.
yeah, you put it in the soup, then it's part of the soup, isn't it? And you no longer see it as its own independent object, it's part of something that's bigger than it. Okay. Where are we? Okay. Any questions? It's interesting to think about, isn't it? You know, and you think about it because the way we relate to words, it's like we think that a word corresponds exactly to the object that is being named. But when you really examine it, yeah, what actually is the referent of the word? Because it doesn't correspond exactly to the object. It isn't the object. Yeah. Well, the word, of course, isn't an object. But even the object that you're applying the word to is not the basis of the designation. Because the basis of the designation has many parts, and the object is one thing. So do you have one thing or do you have many things? Yeah. When you have a carrot there, do you have one thing or do you have many things? When there's a computer here, is it one thing or is it many things? If it's inherently one thing, then it can't also be inherently many things. Which would mean that there's only a computer here. If the computer were one thing, then we could not speak about the parts of the computer, because for it to be one thing, it couldn't have parts. Parts would make many things here.
And if we were just relating to the many parts, then we would have many computers.
Yes. Yeah. Then that would be nice, because then when one part of the computer broke, you would have 7 other computers that would work.
Well, that really is fantastic. All these computers.
So therefore, the whole part of this is to just start questioning this mistaken view. This is how we're trying to pierce through this truly existent appearance.
Yeah. Well, the whole point is that what we're seeing does not exist the way it appears to us. If it existed the way it appears to us, then, because it appears very real, very solid, then we should be able to say it is either one thing or it's many things. Yeah. Or we should be able to, when we saw the cup, see all the parts of the cup. Yeah? So there's a discrepancy between how the object appears to us and how it actually exists. Mm-hmm. Okay? Like, you know, this morning, Venerable Chuni pulled out some pictures, you know, from when she was little. So I looked at her prom picture, yeah. I said, it doesn't look anything like you. Yeah. But that's Chuni, and this is Chuni, but they don't look like each other. Or is that one not Chuni? That one's Barbara. But if that one's inherently Barbara, then there couldn't be a link between this one and that one. Yeah. And this one could not have grown from that one, because once it has one name, it can only be that one thing. That's it. Okay. And it couldn't change. Yeah, because it was one thing with its own essence. Yeah. But you don't look anything like that girl who went to the prom. And I bet you don't feel anything like that girl who went to the prom.
Hopefully there's not much.
So we're really trying to poke holes in the appearances that we are taking as...
Yeah. We're trying to see if things exist the way they appear. Yeah. Because if they exist the way they appear, we should be able to find. The more we examined and looked for them, the clearer what they were would become. Yeah. But the more we examine to try and find them, the murkier it becomes, the more vague. Yeah. Okay.
Can I ask
Yeah?
kind of a technical question?
Mhm.
Something about you said that at the very, very beginning when you said it's the mere I that's reborn,
Yeah.
that's designated principally upon the consciousness aggregate.
Mm-hmm.
is it still okay to call it the when you have the very subtle consciousness after the aggregates have absorbed and before you've appropriated, quote, new aggregates? Is it still a consciousness aggregate?
So your question is, can the fundamental innate mind of clear light
Be an aggregate.
be the consciousness aggregate?
Yeah. Just
Well-
the name. Yeah.
Well, if the fundamental innate mind of clear light a consciousness,
Yes.
then if you can't also call it the consciousness aggregate that exists at that moment, then it would mean you had a consciousness and you would have a consciousness aggregate.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah? Is
Just
there-
going back to what you were saying just now, I think it's always so shocking to think that we're imputing objects on things that are not the object.
Yeah, we are imputing and making things objects that are not the objects.
And when Geshe Taki was saying the example he gave that I found helpful was he said, so Joshua sticks his head in and says something and we say that's Joshua, but he said you're imputing Joshua on his head.
Mm-hmm.
Not Joshua. I was like,
Right.
Or his
Yeah.
voice on the phone, I think he used
Yeah.
that too.
Yeah. So which part is Joshua? And if Joshua exists from its own side, then all those parts should be visible at the same time. Yeah.